Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Jack Unterweger? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I will look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the crimes, then offer my analysis. Jack Unterweger was born in Austria on August 6, 1950. His father was an American soldier, his mother was an Austrian waitress, and Jack claimed that she was a sex worker. When she was pregnant with Jack, she was put in jail for fraud, but she was released by the time he was born. In 1953, Jack's mother was arrested again, so he was sent to live with his grandfather in a small cabin. Jack and his grandfather bonded over a variety of activities, including stealing farm animals. Jack regularly missed school. By the age of 9, he was declared chronically truant. Jack had many entanglements with law enforcement. His favorite crimes involved theft and attacking women. From 1966 to 1974, he spent all but 12 months in prison, having racked up 16 convictions. In December 1974, he kidnapped an 18-year-old West German national named Margaret Schaefer and strangled her with her own bra. In 1976, he was convicted for this murder and sentenced to life in prison. Jack spent his time in prison writing poems, short stories, plays, and an autobiography titled Purgatory or the Trip to Prison, Report of a Guilty Man. Some people have disputed Jack's claim that he wrote the autobiography by himself, but either way, he gained some degree of popularity as a writer. The self-proclaimed elite intellectuals in Austria were impressed by his work. They launched a campaign to get him released from prison. They believed that no one who wrote this well deserved to be in prison. It was a waste of talent. A petition was presented to the president of Austria, but he refused it on the basis that the court had ordered a minimum of 15 years in prison for Jack. Politicians, authors, and journalists kept pressing the issue. They insisted that they understood Jack better than other people. They knew that he was not dangerous and would certainly never kill again. After his 15-year minimum was satisfied, Jack was released from prison on May 23, 1990. He became a celebrity in Austria. He published 2 novels and produced 2 plays. His stories were read on Austrian radio shows. He appeared on television, including on talk shows. He would appear at bookstores and read his work, and his autobiography was used in schools to teach children. This doesn't really seem like the best idea. Maybe an analysis of the school curriculum concluded that there was a deficit of material for future killers. Jack really focused on talking about how he was rehabilitated. He insisted that his homicidal endeavors had come to a conclusion. Jack Unterweger worked as a reporter for a national public service broadcaster. He would cover many different types of crimes, including murders. During his time as a reporter in 1990 and 1991, Jack killed a number of women by strangling them with their own bras, 6 in Austria and 2 in Czechoslovakia. He reported on some of the murders as part of his job, so he was reporting on the murders that he committed. I guess that's one way to always have the inside story. In 1991, an Austrian magazine hired Jack to write for them. They sent him to Los Angeles. He arrived on June 11 and stayed at the notorious Cecil Hotel. This hotel has been associated with a number of high-profile cases, including the serial killer Richard Ramirez, who was active in 1984 and 1985. He was also known as the Night Stalker, and the case of Elisa Lam, a Canadian who was found dead in the water tank on the roof of the building in 2013. When Jack checked in at the front desk, the clerk asked him if he was sure he wanted to stay at the Cecil Hotel. She was really doing a great job of selling that place. She advised him to remove his jewelry for fear that it would be stolen. The young woman informed him that it was a rough place, but Jack insisted on staying there, as he was working on a story. I find it interesting the clerk tried to warn Jack about the dangers of the Cecil Hotel. If she only knew. As hazardous as that area of Los Angeles was, Jack was the one they should have been afraid of. Jack's assignment for the Austrian magazine was to write about crime in Los Angeles and explore the differences in the way that people in the United States and Europe view sex workers. During the 5 weeks that he stayed at the Cecil Hotel, Jack rode along with police officers on patrol, visited areas known for prostitution, and strangled 3 sex workers with their own bras. That last item was not part of the writing assignment. Investigators in Austria started to wonder if Jack could be a serial killer. They noticed that the murders in Austria stopped when Jack left, and of course they heard about the murders in Los Angeles that occurred when he was there. It seemed like death was following Jack wherever he went. Investigators tracked Jack's activity for a while, but initially didn't see anything that made him look guilty. Eventually, however, they collected enough evidence to arrest him. For example, they found credit card transactions that put him in the areas where the murders occurred. The authorities raided his apartment, but Jack had already fled. He and his girlfriend went to Switzerland, France, Canada, and finally to the United States. On February 27, 1992, U.S. Marshals arrested Jack in Miami, Florida. Jack's girlfriend told the police that Jack selected Miami because he liked Don Johnson, one of the stars of the television show Miami Vice. About 3 months later, Jack was extradited to Austria and charged with 11 murders in total, the 6 in Austria, the 2 in Czechoslovakia, and the 3 in the United States. He was found guilty of 9 murders and acquitted of 2. On June 28, 1994, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But he did not even serve 1 full day of his sentence. Sometime between 3 and 3 a.m., now on June 29, his body was found by staff at the prison. He had used the drawstring from his sweatpants to hang himself. Some reports say that his shoelaces may have been involved as well. Jack Unterweger was 43 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few items that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Jack was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. The mental health clinician who assessed him also said that he was psychopathic, sadistic, and had histrionic tendencies. Many people who encountered Jack described him as enthusiastic, energetic, charming, outgoing, precise, articulate, and likable. Image was very important to Jack. When he was released from prison, he bought expensive clothing and a BMW. Jack enjoyed associating with people he viewed as high status and thought of himself as belonging to that group. For example, when he was in Los Angeles, he visited the homes of Zsa Zsa Gabor, Cher, and Austrian filmmaker Robert Dornhelm. Only Robert actually met with him, but still, Jack felt as though he was part of this crowd. Jack did not have any affective empathy, but he had a high level of cognitive empathy. So he could not feel what other people were feeling, but he could understand what they were feeling. This allowed him to be effective at manipulating people. However, it left him appearing shallow. Some people were able to detect this shallowness, but others couldn't, something that we see with a number of psychopaths. Certain people know right away that a person is a psychopath, whereas others have no idea. Item number 2. During the relatively short amount of time Jack was out of prison, he initiated a number of relationships with women. He had 2 serious girlfriends and 40 sex partners on a casual basis. Jack made it seem as though he was interested in literature and journalism, but his obsession was always with sex. He was a sexual domination serial killer, much like Gary Ridgway, Ted Bundy, Joseph DeAngelo, Ed Kemper, Joel Rifkin, and Dennis Rader. Like many serial killers of this type, Jack had a poor relationship with his mother. He eventually developed a hatred of all women. He primarily targeted sex workers because this increased his chances of getting away with the murders. Not getting caught was very important to Jack. He was careful to cover his tracks. When considering how he targeted sex workers and how he was so careful, he was actually quite similar to Gary Ridgway. I think that that particular serial killer has a lot in common with Jack Unterweger. I think that Jack was guilty of his crimes, but he did not leave behind much evidence at all. The jury struggled quite a bit to convict him, and their decision was not unanimous. In Austria, a unanimous decision by a jury was not required for a conviction. Item number 3, Jack was sent to prison for life after his first murder, but was released because he was able to appeal to wealthy intellectuals in Austria who identified as very liberal. These artistically oriented, high-status individuals found Jack to be endearing. They believed that Jack must have been rehabilitated because the level of self-reflection required to be a good writer guaranteed that he had insight. They did not see a way that a good writer could be dangerous. For whatever reason, they didn't really seem to care about Jack paying the price for his 1974 murder. They believed that if he wasn't an ongoing threat to society, he should be released. It was a waste of his incredible talent for him to sit in prison, which represented an injustice that could not be tolerated. After Jack was released from prison, he appeared to validate their faith in him. He talked about how he had been rehabilitated. His case proved that killers could be reformed in prison. He was invited to cocktail parties at expensive houses. Everybody wanted to be with Jack. High society welcomed him with open arms. Here's what I think happened with these wealthy elite individuals. As I mentioned, this group identified as very liberal. Liberalism is a facet of openness to experience. All the facets of a personality trait tend to move together. So if a person is high in one particular personality facet, they are probably high in the rest of the facets that load on the trait. This isn't always the case, but again, it's the tendency. Other facets of openness to experience include creativity and investment in fantasy. These two facets have a strong association with writing ability. Therefore, writers tend to be more liberal. Again, the facets tend to move together. Because Jack was a good fiction writer, the members of high society assumed he must also be very liberal. This made him more endearing for two reasons. One, he was like them, and two, it offered them an explanation for his bad behavior that they could live with. People who are very liberal tend to be rebellious and break the rules, but also usually avoid serious crimes like murder. They view Jack as someone who is non-traditional, disobedient, and defiant, as opposed to truly dangerous. Now, of course, what doesn't make sense here is that Jack was convicted of murder. Most people think of murderers as dangerous. This didn't bother the wealthy intellectuals because of the way Jack framed the murder of his first victim. He said that his victim reminded him of his mother. He punched her in the head out of anger, and she unexpectedly died. In reality, he was lying. She was actually strangled. Essentially, Jack was able to manipulate the members of high society. As someone who was narcissistic, he understood their narcissism and used it against them. This was his most important victory because it allowed him to commit all of the other murders. I find it interesting that after Jack was arrested for several murders, those wealthy, high-status individuals didn't have much to say. They were like, Jack who? Never heard of him. One intellectual in Vienna did offer an explanation, albeit one that was logically flawed. Referring to Jack, they said, quote, if he was the killer, he would be one of the cases of the century. Statistically, the chance that I would know one of the cases of the century is so unlikely that, therefore, I think he is not guilty, unquote. I'm not sure the term intellectual is appropriate for this particular supporter of Jack. To be fair, Jack also manipulated mental health professionals and prison officials. The day he was released in 1990, the warden of the prison said, quote, we will never find a prisoner so well prepared for freedom, unquote. Now moving to my final thoughts. Sending people to prison serves a number of purposes, including a deterrent, a punishment, and keeping society safe. It's tempting to look at prisoners and think, if they're not a danger to society, they should be released. But that neglects the deterrent and keeping society safe elements. In Jack's case, the members of high society had such a grandiose view of themselves that anyone who was like them must also be great. It never occurred to them that being like them could be destructive. They did not have the insight to see both their own positive and negative characteristics. One could argue these wealthy intellectuals really were like Jack Unterweger. Neither one had insight. This lack of insight led to the deaths of at least 9 people. These victims died not only due to Jack's narcissism, but due to the narcissism of these self-proclaimed he waits. Those are my thoughts in the case of Jack Unterweger. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.